Hello and welcome to this week's edition of FameNFomo, where we interview these social media influencers, women who dominate the online space. Today I'm being joined by two women whose life choices are nothing short of inspiring. First up is traveler and now author Shivya Nath. Years back, she realized that she isn't meant for the corporate life and gave up her job to follow her one and primary passion, traveling. But she's not like the usual traveler. With her job, she left a lot more. A quick look first at her life, and then we talk to the shooting star herself. 4 years ago, she gave up her home and sold most of her possessions to embrace a nomadic life. She quit a corporate life to live her dream of traveling the globe, and she's never looked back. Traveling slow, seeking offbeat experiences, Shivya Nath stays in a place for as long as it inspires her and then moves on. It is this unique lifestyle that has given her enough experiences to even pen her own journey and share it with the world. Her book, The Shooting Star, charts her battles and adventures from the cubicle to the road as she writes candidly about her struggles. Well, thank you for joining us, Shivya. What an inspiring life. You know, you gave up your job about 6-7 years back and took up traveling, your one and only passion. How did this journey start as a traveler? When did it start? We want to know it all.
So I guess I grew up in a small town in Dehradun. And back then, you know, like with my family, we never really traveled much. But it was when I moved to Singapore to study that I got a sneak peek of traveling in Southeast Asia. But I think my journey as a traveler really began when I took a 2-month sabbatical from my corporate 9-to-5 job. And during that time, I spent a month volunteer traveling in Spiti, which is a mountain desert in Himachal Pradesh. And I think that put so much in perspective for me because it was the first time I was traveling alone. Right. I was hitchhiking with strangers, I was sleeping under thousands of stars, and I think it made me realize that there's so much more I can do in life than work in a 9-to-5 corporate job and sit in a cubicle and chase money. And I think that really inspired me to gradually quit my job and really embrace traveling as a major part of my life.
Okay, so you know, you've already told us a little about what and why you gave up everything, but let's go into the details of that. What actually made you give up everything to embrace the life that you have? You know, there must be a story.
Right. So I think, you know, for a lot of people, they wait for something tragic to happen in their lives, like a disease, or they lose all their money, or the loss of a loved one. And while those are really powerful stimulants, I felt like I didn't really wait for anything really dramatic to happen. One day that, you know, there are so many things I own that I don't really need in life, and there's, you know, just the idea of having one place to call home and constantly coming back to it. I don't really need that either because I had moved all my work online after quitting my job. So I think it was just one day a realization that struck me. And I decided to sell most of my belongings. So everything I have now packs in my backpack. And I decided to give up my apartment. So I don't rent a place anymore. I don't have a permanent address anymore. I stay in a place for a month or as long as it inspires me. And then I move on to another part of the world. So I think it was just one realization, one kind of like a strike of lightning in a way. To say that, you know, I'm going to build a different life for myself, and that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years.
So, you know, it's been a while since you embraced this new life of yours, but how has traveling changed your life as a person? How has it changed you?
Well, I guess it's pretty hard to answer that in a very concise way, but I would highlight a few things. So first of all, you know, just the idea of not owning more than what I can carry in my backpack, that has been really liberating in a way. And I think this whole journey of minimalism has definitely impacted the way I look at life. I think it's also the fact that, traveling around the world often alone, like going to remote corners of the world, like places like Guatemala and Ethiopia and Ecuador and so forth. I think it's opened me up to so many different perspectives around the world. It's made me realize that, as people, even though we might be really different, in terms of our language, our food, our culture, our upbringing, our traditions, but I think in our heart we are all the same people, and I think that's a very powerful realization that has impacted my life.
And you're absolutely right. In our heart we are the same people. So I hope that after watching this interview, a lot of other people will also get inspired. But talking of inspiration, Shivya, you recently published a book. I will ask my producers to put out that photograph of your book on the screens as well. The Shooting Star. What's all of that about? What was the inspiration behind this book?
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited that I've just published my book. The book, it's called The Shooting Star, and I think it's really about my journey. I grew up in a small town in India, and the book really kind of looks at how I managed to break away from societal conventions, to leave the corporate rat race behind, and make traveling the focus of my life. So basically, through a series of personal travel stories, there are lots of adventures and misadventures around the world, everywhere from South Africa to Ethiopia to South America to India. It basically travels around the world. I basically talk about my travels around the world, and I kind of talk about the places and the encounters that impacted me deeply and that set me on this journey that I am on. So it basically looks at why I quit my corporate job, how I made it work financially, what it was like to break it to my family, who are very protective, and like any other family, they value financial security. And I think it looks at why I decided to sell all my possessions to give up my home, and what it's been like the last 5 years to kind of live like a nomad.
Okay, so as I've been saying, I've probably used that word too much, inspiring, in this particular interview, but we have it there on the screens, the book that you've written, The Shooting Star, and you've traveled the world, so many places, but any one place that you've traveled which has completely changed your perspective?
So I think, there are many places that come to mind, but if I had to say just one, I would say Ecuador in South America is one such place.
Wow.
Simply because I think there's this perception that, we can either have our traditions and our culture, or we can have a modern way of life, or we can live, close to nature. But I think in Ecuador, I felt that the indigenous Quechua people, they still have their traditions and their culture very much intact. They still live in harmony with nature, and yet it is pretty developed. There are the comforts of a modern urban life, and I think just the mix of the two is, it really impacted me, because in India it feels like, we're losing so much of our traditions, our culture, our way of life, our closeness to nature, just so that we can embrace a more developed life, especially in our cities. And I think traveling in Ecuador really put that in perspective for me.
Okay. And Shivya, considering that you've traveled to so many places, I obviously have to bring this up. The fact that people aren't able to wrap their heads around the idea of a woman traveling alone. This happened with me recently as well, when I went on a solo trip, and everybody was worried and some people were a little taken aback. Have you ever faced that sort of criticism, and how do you deal with it?
So I wouldn't exactly call it criticism, but I think it's still strange for people to meet someone who's, especially a woman who's traveling alone. One, because as a woman I'm taking charge of myself, and two, because I'm kind of having fun in my own company. So I think the idea of this is still very alien in India, but also in other parts of the world. For example, I traveled to Mauritius a few years ago, and all I wanted to do was hang out on the beautiful beaches and enjoy the Indian Ocean, and maybe chat with locals and see how laid back their life was. But when I got there, what I did was I rented a scooter and I drove around the entire island. but everyone I met kind of looked at me with pity. Because they thought this poor girl has, come all the way to this really romantic island, which is like a popular honeymoon destination, and she's all by herself. And I think this idea that I could just be having fun all by myself, and I'm not some poor little girl who, who had no choice but to come alone. I think this idea really bewildered people. But I think the good part is that over the years, I've been traveling solo off and on for about 7 years now. And I think perceptions are changing, especially as more and more people, both women and men, decide to travel alone.
Right.
This whole idea that someone can enjoy their company and enjoy their travels on their own, it is catching up. So I think there is a lot to look forward to that way.
And a very important perspective. I like what you say there, that it's the idea of people enjoying their own company that's sort of strange. But Shivya, when we talk about travel, especially in India, we know that it's not safe for women. So how has your experience been, and has anything ever happened to you that made you take a step back and rethink that, okay, rethink your traveling, the journey?
So I think, of course, there is the perception that traveling in India is really unsafe. But I think it's not just about traveling, right? I mean, I lived for 2 years in Delhi, and I think I was always on my guard. Like the moment I entered a crowded metro, or I was walking down a crowded street, or I was walking down an empty street, or I was, alone at night, trying to go somewhere, or even taking an auto or something. So I think it's not just about traveling; it's life in general, where as women we always have to be on our guard. But I think traveling just gets a bad name that way. Personally, I would say that I felt more on my guard living in Delhi as opposed to when I traveled to a remote village, say in the Himalayas or in the Western Ghats or something. Because I feel that when you're in a small remote village, everyone kind of knows everyone else, and someone is always looking out for you. So I wouldn't say that traveling is really unsafe in India. I would say that or anywhere around the world for that matter. But I would say it's all about training your gut to be on your guard, to be able to look out for yourself. And I think as women growing up in India, that's something that we're kind of taught from our childhood to do. So it's actually maybe it's easier for some of us to travel around the world alone than for others.
Absolutely. And of course, as you said, that it's not just traveling. Maybe traveling gets a bad name, but the point is that we can't ignore the fact that it is unsafe for girls to travel alone. And as unfortunate as that is, could you give some suggestions perhaps on how to travel safe, considering the amount of experience you have?
So I'd maybe share 3 tips about that. But I think they're applicable not just to India, but anywhere around the world that you're traveling, and not just as a girl, but also as a guy, I guess. So I guess my first suggestion would be, if you're going to a new place, whether in India or somewhere else, try not to get there after dark, because that just makes things a little more complicated, especially if you don't know your way around. The second tip would be that instead of staying in hotels or guest houses, I always look at homestays or Airbnbs, where there's a local host that I can immediately build a connect with, and it's somebody who can advise me on things to do around, maybe let me in on the local secrets, but also give me some tips on safe areas to explore by myself,
that makes a lot of sense.
Which is really helpful. And I guess the third tip would be to get a local SIM card wherever I am, so that in case of an emergency, I can call my host, I can call the police, I can call a friend. I can get online on Google Maps and see that I'm headed the right way. And I mean, just having the internet on my palm is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Just making sure that I'm in a safe area and I can get home safely. So I guess those are the 3 very easy tips to follow.
Right. Thank you so much. Everything that you said has made so much sense. But before we let you go, Shivya, your message to all the girls who've been meaning to pack that bag and just take off.
So I guess this is not just for girls, but also for boys and women and men and people everywhere. I think my advice is that don't let the fear stop you.
Right.
You know, there are so many people who will tell you that India is not safe or the world is not safe to go alone or even go with someone. There are so many people who will tell you that this is not a practical thing to do. But I think if you feel the call in your heart and you have this dream in your mind, then do your research, do your hard work, make sure that you have everything in place, and then just go after that dream. You know, try to fight your fears by being really ready and go for it. Don't let anyone stop you, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it.
You know, thank you so much, Shivya, for that inspiring message. Hear that out, girls. This is a woman who's been traveling for so many years. So of course, everything that she has to say, you know, comes with a lot of experience. Best of luck for your book.